Let's have a word with Dr. Duncan Robertson about all of this, an academic in policy and strategy analytics at Loughborough University and a member of the Independent Sage Group as well. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. What are we to make of that, first of all, just on the Eat Out to Help Out stuff? Rishi Sunak's baby when he was Chancellor. Should we be surprised that, according to Patrick Vallance, scientists didn't know about it? Apparently the Department of Health didn't know about it, had no input in it until it was announced.
Well, I think this goes to the heart of the problem in terms of what the government was trying to do. It wasn't clear. It wasn't setting out their objectives. And this sort of balance between the economy and the virus was a difficult one to do. But all the evidence for the science was very clear, very open, very open to questioning. And I think one of the criticisms is there wasn't really that sort of sage for economics. And so that sort of economic modelling either wasn't there or couldn't be interrogated. So I think that's something to go forward. And I think politicians are good at getting evidence that they need to make the decisions that they want. So we talk about evidence-based policy, but you're not sort of as opposed to policy-based evidence. And I think, this is something that we saw time and time again in the pandemic, just talking about there's nothing in the data. And if you don't listen to the data or don't see the data or refuse to engage with the data, then of course you don't have to take that data into account. So I think that was very unfortunate.
Yeah, actually, Patrick Vallance was suggesting, similar to what you've just said there at his session at the inquiry yesterday, suggesting that an economic advisory group similar to the scientific advisory group SAGE should have been set up. He said it had one meeting and then it wasn't pursued. Where does all of this fit in with the claims? We were watching those press conferences and we were told pretty much every day that the government were following the science. Were they not?
Well, I think in the early days, it was great for the government to have this expert panel of hugely eminent scientists, and many scientists were part of SAGE and their subgroups. And so following the science was the right thing to have done at the beginning. But the science was new and people were trying to work out what this virus was. And I think, at that time, there was no such thing as a COVID expert. And even now, there's no such thing in the whole of COVID, no such thing as an expert in the whole of COVID. So I think, following the science worked, but then it was more blame the science, I think. And it was really quite useful to have scientists flanking the Prime Minister, who was making these tricky decisions.
Yeah.
And it kind of gave that authority, which I don't think was meant to have been given.
That fits into one of the bits that jumped out at us yesterday. Patrick Vallance's own diaries detailed a meeting in July 2020 in which he claims Rishi Sunak said the challenge was handling the scientists, not handling the virus. So this is what Patrick Vallance put in his own diary. And there was an added bit to this because Rishi Sunak apparently didn't realise that the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, was in the online meeting when he said that. What are we to make of that? That there was a kind of disconnect in a way, a level of distrust that we were seeing there between politicians and scientists? Because I guess that is the impression you start to build.
Well, I think, we sort of think about scientists and politicians as being kind of extremely different things. So, some scientists have a little bit of politician in them and some politicians have a little bit of scientist in them. But I think, overall, I think my observation is scientists were working very hard in good faith. And I think that was something that, scientists generally do. And I think the other thing to do is to think about, what scientists, how they think. I think one of the ways they think, I think it's the motto of the Royal Society, is take nobody's word for it. And I think, working in that sort of environment where it's political and you're getting all sorts of messages that are, being part of the decision making, then scientists really have to take that objective view. And I think generally they did.
Yeah. And what about Boris Johnson's understanding of it all? The suggestion that he was bamboozled by the science. But then Sir Patrick does give the caveat that actually this was a kind of global problem that, politicians, in the case of Boris Johnson, he points out, stopped learning science at 15, which a lot of us did, quite frankly. And suddenly you're expecting the politicians to get their head around pretty difficult science day after day after day. I mean, where do your sympathies lie on that? Because I guess you could point at the scientists and say, well, you could make it a little bit easier to understand.
Well, I think that was one of the wasted opportunities with these press conferences. You had the nation kind of gripped to these things. And I think one thing that I would have liked to have done is to have some sort of way of kind of teaching people and teaching politicians at the same time about all these very difficult concepts. I mean, they're not easy. And I think there was a wasted opportunity to get people to, for want of a better word, leveling up in their science and maths knowledge, which they are difficult concepts,
Yeah.
and they just have to be, we all have to learn them, and we all have to, think about them. But, to really, I mean, Boris Johnson, okay, he may not be an expert in maths, but you hope somebody leading the nation has the ability to have an open mind and to learn about these things and to take the time to take things on board that perhaps aren't in their expertise.
I like your idea of learning, but I was doing enough homeschooling of my own for my own kids, to be honest with you, to be good in my own lessons. But yeah, okay. Just a final one on what your insights are on the kind of general information that we're getting from this inquiry at the moment, because we're going to speak to a former health minister, Lord Bethell, later on, who was in the role during the pandemic. And I know he's going to tell us that he's slightly disappointed that there seems to be too much point scoring, he said, she said stuff coming out of the inquiry. And for him, it's too much about personalities. There's a lot of criticism of Matt Hancock in particular, and a lot of that, I guess, will be warranted as far as a lot of people see it. But he's saying there's not enough insight on the big picture, looking at global collaborations, questions over the emergence of a vaccine, the bum steer we might have got on that, all those big things that will be feeding into what I guess this inquiry is actually fundamentally about, which is learning the lessons for the next time there's a pandemic. I don't know what your view on that is.
Well, I think you're absolutely right in terms of, it's about learning lessons, but it's also putting those lessons into practice. And I think one of the fears is this inquiry is going to go on for another few years, and it'll produce a report, and everybody's evidence will be nice and self-consistent. Everybody will have their story to tell. But the problem is, are we in any better position to deal with the next pandemic, which may come at any time?
Okay. Duncan, thank you. Dr. Duncan Robertson, who's an academic in policy and strategy analytics at Loughborough Uni, also a member of Independent Sage.